Hello, and welcome to Possibilities, the show where we give people living with a variety of different abilities and their loved ones a space to share their lives with the world. Thank you for joining us today, and here's your host, Danny Steeves.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome to today's episode of Possibilities. Today's kind of a deja view of last week's episode. You might recognize my guest today because she was on my panel last week or whenever you were watching this. So I would like to welcome back to the show Jessica Gibor. She's accessibility advocate in the Toronto area. So welcome back to Possibilities, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. I thought we would have you back because we kind of got cut off short from our conversation last time you were on, so I thought we could just do an interview from just you and me so we can fill in some of the gaps. So could you start by just sharing a bit of your story and what drives you for being an accessibility advocate?
Okay. Well, my name is Jessica, and I am 29 years old. I'm going to be 30 in a couple of months. And I studied journalism at Ryerson University, as well as before that, if I go way back, Durham College. So I did my diploma in print journalism at Durham, and then went to Ryerson and did my 4-year bachelor's degree. And while I was there, they kept telling us to write what we knew. We always had to take classes in a variety of things, but whenever we had an option to decide what we wanted to write about, this whole write what you know thing kind of stuck with me. And so I would often take the opportunity to write about disability related things because that was a big part of what I knew. And growing up, my mom would often say to me that, maybe I would be some sort of advocate, that I was lucky to have the voice that I have and the ability to communicate the way that I do, and also a unique perspective as someone who does have cerebral palsy. I have spastic diplegia. I walk with canes now and occasionally use a wheelchair. Growing up, I used a walker, a wheelchair, and canes. So, I was a 3-device walkie, which was sort of unique at the time. My mom always had to fight with the government to get me funding for those to quite well, but was still very much disabled and marginalized in that way, that I had a unique perspective and sort of a responsibility to advocate for my community. So when I was in school, I sort of gravitated towards that. When you're growing up, when someone says that to you, you're just like, yeah, okay, we'll see. But the older I got, the more I started to see the things that maybe I should speak up about, and that things did need to change, and that I was often misunderstood, and not just me, but people like me, people with disabilities, people who were able to go to school and live away from home and do all sorts of, kind of average things, but have to do them in a different way. There was sort of the two-pronged struggle there of that I was doing those things, that I was living away from my parents and going to school and had a boyfriend who was able-bodied and friends and would go to concerts and like to travel and do all of these things. So people were often surprised by these things. Everywhere I would go, they would be like, oh my goodness, you live away from home all by yourself? What? And then on the other hand, if they were able to accept that I could do these things, they were still sort of surprised or unaware of the parts of it that were still sort of a struggle and the things that I had to do to accommodate.
Yeah.
And what it was like to be an adult with a disability. And, that time was also my early to mid 20s too. I'd been out of the system for a couple of years. You grow out, you age out of Boardview and all that at 20, 21. And so the first couple of years that I was out, I was just happy to be free and focused on school. But then you start to worry about where you're going to get your physio and how you are going to do those things that you used to have help with. So that's sort of how I fell into that. And then through the process of doing research for a article for school, I found CanChild. And that's how I got on the CPNet advisory board where you and I met.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's sort of my long, convoluted story of part of my journey of how I got here.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. You brought up a few things as you were speaking that I want to dive into. First of all, why is it people always seem to think that when you were growing up, did you have a problem fitting in with the school system, or what?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. For a couple of reasons. One is from an academic point of view. I have as well as my physical disability, my moderate CP spastic diplegia.
Yeah.
I also have a learning disability.
Yeah.
Which growing up made it harder for me to learn how to do things like reading and writing and math. I'm still I have coping strategies for reading and writing. As you know, I'm a journalist now, so I'm pretty good. But I'm still terrible at math. You don't want me to do anything related to math. Have someone else do my taxes, and I have a calculator. But I learn differently than the average person. So the conventional school system was a big struggle. And, the first couple of years of being in school, I went to Grandview Children's Center in Oshawa, and they have the Campbell School there. So in kindergarten, I had all the help that I needed, and I also did my physio as well. But then when I transitioned into grade 1, I hadn't been identified as a person with a learning disability yet. And so I just wasn't able to keep up with the class, and I almost failed out, actually. Yeah. I ended up my parents decided to move to Bowmanville to be closer to my grandparents. And when we did that, I moved to a new school that had a better special needs program, like special education. And I was finally identified. I went through all the tests and everything as a person with a learning disability and was able to get the help that I needed. But, that meant that I was taken out of class half the day and when I was younger, I didn't really mind because I was just happy to be somewhere that I understood what was going on. But it does sort of put a target on your back as being someone who's different.
Uh,
And, with my physical disability as well, a lot of kids didn't understand and would make fun of me and were not very nice. I did have, a small group of friends, which is always good. And a lot of them, as I got older, the friends that I made when I was, 12, 13, 14, a lot of them I'm still friends with. But those early years of school were definitely a challenge with the adaptations I needed for my physical disability, like getting ready for recess. My parents, the first couple of years that I was in the conventional school system, my parents would have to come in almost every week and show them how to take my AFOs on and off and put my snow boots on and do all the things that I needed to do, make sure the school was equipped for me to, go to the washroom and it wasn't until I switched schools that I had a EA most of the time, someone to help me. So that was a big help too. So the struggle was sort of two-pronged. It was finding out what help I needed, getting that help, and then the social aspect of it, of like being that kid who's different, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
having other kids, a couple of them being really cool about it, but the vast majority not understanding. And so you just sort of, teased a lot, or you feel awkward.
yeah,
You're kind of on the outside.
yeah.
And like I said, it wasn't until I was like, 12, 13, 14 that I started to feel a little bit better about things.
Yeah. What, 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 was the staff willing to make those adaptations for you, or did you have a hard time convincing them that you needed those things?
My mom was definitely one of my warriors about that. She was in there every time it was necessary, kind of reading them the riot act and explaining to them that it was necessary and that I deserved it, and those kinds of things. And now I have those abilities in myself. Sometimes when I'm somewhere now as an adult, and someone's not accommodating me per my rights, I get kind of frustrated and I start, explaining to them what my rights are and I start to sound like my mother. A couple of years ago, I was at an airport with a friend of mine and they were not accommodating us properly for the flight. And I started to very sternly explain to them that they were required to accommodate us. And I handled the situation fine, but my friend said to me, you really sounded like your mother just there. Like, thank you for handling it, but you sounded a lot like Susan, just so you know. So my mom was definitely my champion. There was a lot of things that needed to be handled throughout. When I switched from my school that I was in grade 1, where they really didn't understand me at all, I almost failed out. I couldn't go to the washroom when I wanted to. I couldn't go for a recess when I wanted to. That was not a good time.
No.
But then when I moved to Bowmanville, I moved to a smaller school and I had an EA. And they had a special education program that I was a part of, like I said. And so for the most part, it was better, but it was like on a case-by-case basis of checking in and making sure that I was being regularly evaluated and being, accommodated as I was growing. You know what I mean? That I wasn't pigeonholed as in like, this is what she could do when she was in grade 2, but now she's in grade 4. And we haven't really made any progress, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or social things like being allowed to go on school trips. I had a lot of friends who their school didn't want them to go on school trips because they felt it was unsafe and they didn't want to take like the insurance risk. My parents were not about that.
Or in my case, they didn't want you but a wheelchair bus, so
Yes,
yeah.
this too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so my mom always pushed for those kinds of things. And when I was young, like grade 3, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, my dad worked midnights in a factory. And so I remember him having the time to go with me on school trips for those things. So we went to the Science Center, we went to the Environment Center, we went to all sorts of places. Pioneer Village, all the classics. In grade 6, the school trip was Canada's Wonderland. Well, I've always loved roller coasters, and so did my mom. She would always lift me onto the rides, and when they'd be like, can your daughter, climb a ladder during an emergency, we would look them right in the face and be like, yes, she can. Yes, she can. I cannot. But we would always go. So in grade 6, my mom took the day off work and came with me for that trip. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I switched schools again in grade 8 to go to Catholic school. When we moved again, to make it better for me to go to the Catholic high school like my parents wanted me to. It was the better school option in my area. That teacher was not very accommodating, but I made it through. She didn't want to accommodate me at all. She thought that I was dumb. I have a lazy eye, so I can't make eye contact conventionally. It doesn't look like I'm making eye contact at you.
Yeah.
So the grade 8 teacher that I had used to yell at me, like, look at me when I'm talking to you and things like that. And at one point she called my mom and asked her about it. And my mom was like, she has a lazy eye. Like, she's had 3 surgeries to fix it. And this is just where we are. But I promise she's looking at you.
Yeah.
So, but I made it through because at that point I did have a number of strategies, and it was just 1 year. But it was just, I never really felt like I fit in. You know what I mean? I still sometimes am just different, and I'm just more comfortable with it now than I was.
If someone is listening to this right now and they don't feel like they're fitting in, what would your message be to that person or that individual?
My message would be to not give up, to still to find what makes them happy, what drives them. For me, it was sort of to embrace my differences and, get involved in advocacy and, meet more people who were like me. I always went to Easter Seals camp growing up. So every summer I would spend time with people who were like me. And a lot of my really good friends came out of that. So I have a good mix of friends with disabilities and able-bodied friends. So that was always good, because I went to like I said, when I went to school, I went to a small school, and it was always me and maybe one other person. You know what I mean? There was always a small group of us who had disabilities. So, grow your community and just follow what makes you happy and what you're passionate about. And get involved. If you feel called to get involved, get involved. Part of why I got involved with advocacy is because I got frustrated with how things were in society, and I wanted to make them more accessible and have people understand us better, understand me better. And instead of just being frustrated and angry about it, I thought, why not try to help and make some of that change myself?
Yeah.
Right? So even in my writing, you probably read some. I often write about my experience or use it to jump off of my experience to another topic. So I thought, instead of trying to run away from my difference and feel uncomfortable about it, I thought I'll just embrace it and try to use it to make a difference. So I guess my message would be to follow what makes you passionate in life and makes you happy, but try not to run away from your difference. Embrace it.
Good for you. Okay, my next topic is a topic that you mentioned on our last episode, and that is employment. So,
Oh, yes.
what are why do you think people with disabilities have trouble gaining employment?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that this could be a thing, and maybe not everyone will agree with me, but my experience has been that one of the reasons it's difficult is because you may be on ODSP or some sort of other employment, like on some other income supplement, right? And so if it's ODSP, for example, when you start working, they start taking your income, right? So it's hard to work enough to make more than you make on ODSP to make it worth losing your ODSP. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can make up to $200 a month before they start taking money away from you, but then after that $200, then they take 50 cents on every dollar, and if the Ontario government has its way, pretty soon it'll be 75 cents on every dollar that they take from your ODSP based on how much you work, right? But then you may not get ODSP that month because you made more than you get on ODSP, which is great. But then it's like, do they still give you your insurance benefit for your medical and your dental? And maybe they're supposed to, but there's often a clerical error, which they don't, and so then you don't get it, and then you have to phone them and explain it to them, and then it'll take them a couple weeks to get it all sorted, and you have to hand in paperwork every month that shows exactly how much you made, and that's a bit of a hassle, especially if you're like me and your local ODSP office isn't by an accessible subway station. It's going to be accessible in a couple of years, but it's not there yet. And you hand it in, but your ODSP office is overworked, so maybe they don't get to it in time. So
Sorry
no worries.
Yeah. I Are you saying that your local RDSP office is not accessible at the moment?
The office itself, the ODSP office itself is accessible. In fact, it's attached to a building that has assistive living for people with disabilities. So in theory, it's very accessible to a segment of society. However, if you are me and you have to take the subway to get there, like that's the easiest way to get there, that subway station is not accessible. So I am lucky that I'm able to most days take the stairs, but this is not always the case, right? And then I have to walk about 10 minutes from the subway station. So in the winter, that can be rough. And, sometimes it just isn't a good time. You know what I mean? Like I'm not always doing that well. As you know, like we had to reschedule this interview, right? So sometimes I'm not doing that well. So then you have to think about, my friend who lives in that apartment building, am I going to see her earlier in the week so that maybe I can give her my paperwork to hand in? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's I guess my part of my rant, and I'm sorry that it's a rant, but part of what makes working when you have a disability a struggle is that while we are very lucky to have the assistance that we have, and I wouldn't give it up for anything because a lot of us still need it, there's a lot of red tape.
Yeah.
And for some people with disabilities, it's not worth working and risk to working to have to deal with all this red tape or to risk not having enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally know what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it is finding employment that is accessible to your needs.
Yeah.
Whether that is, working full time. I have a hard time working full time. So my last job was part time.
So
can take a while to find a job that's
Yeah.
part-time.
So what, going to that, what kind of jobs have you had in the past?
Jobs that I've had in the past. Well, when I graduated school, I did some freelance for a while, which is good because you can do it from anywhere. So I wrote for publications that would allow me to write about disability as well. So I wrote for Bloom, which is part of Boardview. I did some writing for them for about a year. I wrote for Torontoist, which is a Toronto publication that was interested in the perspective of a person with disability in the city. So I wrote about housing and public transit. Sometimes I wrote about employment. And then, as you might know, I worked for CanChild for a little while. I did communications for them part-time and remotely. I built their phase 2 5-year report. And in the summer, while in university and a little bit after as well, I worked as a camp counselor at Easter Seals Camp Marywood.
Okay.
Near Ottawa, which is not necessarily journalism at all, but was a lot of fun while I was in school and a bit after. I loved camp, and there I got to, sort of be a mentor and an advocate for the other campers with disabilities as well. It was really cool as a fellow person with a disability to work with them. We have a lot of fantastic staff at Marywood, but only a few of us usually have disabilities, so we bring a bit of a different perspective, which is a lot of fun. And then this past year, I worked for the University of Guelph Humber. And that was an okay job. I worked part-time, which was good. I was still able to keep up my physio appointments and that kind of thing, but ultimately we had difficulties coming to agreement on how to accommodate my learning disability, so I decided not to continue my contract.
So you you mentioned at on the last episode you mentioned you're in between contracts.
Yes.
At the moment. How's that job going?
The job search is hard for anyone.
Yeah.
Especially this time of year. There's not a lot of people hiring in the fall into the winter time. But it can be particularly challenging for someone with a disability. Like I said, I can't just do any job.
Yeah.
Aside from, wanting to do something that is in my skill set that I find interesting, it's also about, what kind of hours they need me to do. Yeah. Where is the office located?
Yeah.
Is it close to a transit stop? Like, how long is it going to take me to get there? Because I went for Guelph Humber, I went to Humber College in the north, but that took an hour and 15 minutes each way on the subway and the bus, which isn't too bad, but took a while, you know what I mean? So I'd like to do something a little bit closer. And then is it full-time? Is it part-time? If it's full-time, do I think it'd be somewhere that would be understanding if I had a doctor's appointment or needed to work from home once in a while? Yeah. Is it something that I'm passionate about because, as much as that might be a pipe dream, something that I'm interested in is also easier for me to get into and facilitate, facilitate my coping mechanisms for my learning disability. Because the more interested you are in something, the easier it is to, the easier it is to accommodate and make less errors. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of things to think about. How much money would I make? How would it affect my ODSP? Is there Is there, benefits?
Yeah.
Am I required to drive because I can't drive? But am I required to drive?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Am I required to type 120 words a minute because I can't type as quickly as the average person because of dexterity issues?
Right.
These are all things that one has to think about, right?
Yeah.
Do I think the organization would be willing to accommodate my disability? Like,
Speaking on the accommodation, do you think um employees are willing to accommodate people with disabilities most of the time, or do you think most employees are close-minded to that?
in my experience, employers usually start off well intentioned, but as soon as something becomes, anything too out of the ordinary or requiring extra time or becoming too expensive, they are less keen to, you know what I mean?
Can you give me an example?
An example. So one of the things to do with my learning disability is sometimes it takes me a bit longer to process information.
Yeah.
Right? So, but that doesn't mean I'm less capable. I can still do the work just as well as anyone else, and maybe better, because I am like if you don't mind me saying so, fairly talented, and I have a good perspective to bring, especially if you're asking about disability related things, which sometimes I do. But if a task takes the average person an hour, it might take me an hour and a half. So deadlines are important. I need to know when you need it done by, and I need to know in a reasonable time, right?
Yeah.
So, and try not to change your mind too much, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it can be hard for me in an environment where deadlines are less clear. If I had an employer who would say something like, here's something I need you to do sometime in the next 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you come back to me next week and you're like, well, actually, I need that thing right now. That's not gonna, it might be done, but it might not be done because it's based on the priorities of other things you've given me, right? So essentially, I need good management. I need clear deadlines and clear expectations. What do you want me to do, and when do you need me to do it by? And this can be hard in some fast-paced environments, especially in media type things, which is sort of my Achilles heel. But that's one thing that can be challenging, and sometimes employers are less likely to be understanding. Also, sometimes I would go to job interviews and I could tell that people were making assumptions. I've been asked to leave job interviews before because they didn't realize that I was disabled. You know what I mean? Like,
Sorry to cut you off again, but
no worries.
are you saying that they asked you to leave even before the interview started?
Yes. Yeah.
Really?
And then I've had other times where the job interview is just very, very short. But everything based on, the job posting was something that I probably could have done. Otherwise I wouldn't have gone. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't have applied. But even in, the journalism world, a lot of friends that I have or people that I've gone to school with, they've got internships at newspapers where you essentially run around and get coffee and chase fire trucks, and it's a great way to learn. But I can't do those things. You know what I mean? So you just have to find other ways.
Briefly, because I want to get to a few more topics, but going back to philosophical kind of, um, why do you think society has this idea that people with disabilities don't have much to offer?
Why do people think that?
Yeah,
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I think the easy answer, or maybe the knee-jerk answer, the slightly jaded answer, is I think people assume that we're dumb. I think people assume that we can't possibly be as smart as them, that we can't possibly have gone to school and got the same credentials that they have, you know, or have, or that our different perspective could be valuable. I think people are afraid and ignorant of things they don't understand.
yeah. Like I'll briefly tell you a story of a friend of mine. Like like uh she's a double amputee. Um
Mhm.
um she doesn't look like she has a disability. Like she has two prosthetic legs
Mhm.
and no arms. Um, from, from yeah, because she wasn't born with them, but she told me a story one time where she was in a, a business suit in
Mhm.
the Tim Hortons line, and she was like a complete stranger. Like the lady at Tim Hortons asked a complete stranger what she wanted in her coffee because she didn't she didn't think she was capable of answering that question.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's crazy. I don't understand how, you can be dressed nice for work and that kind of, because working at the university and that, or going
Yeah,
to various interviews and things, I've had to dress nice. Not to mention, I think I dress nice most of the time, and I think I look capable, but I could be out, checking into a flight at the airport. I could be out ordering a tea at Tim Hortons. And if I'm with a friend or have someone near me, that person who is supposed to be helping me will look at the other person and ask them for me. And that is when you have to say, no, 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 I'm the one who knows all the answers.
yeah,
You know, um, even when I'm with my mom now, growing up, obviously she was my mom, she took care of me a lot. She knew most of the answers to these types of questions, but as I get older, she knows them less and less. So when I'm somewhere with my mom, whether it's checking into a doctor's appointment or checking into a flight or something like that, and they start talking to my mom asking these questions, I have to say, no, she probably doesn't know the answer. You have to talk to me,
yeah,
right? But no matter how nicely we're dressed or what job we're at, people are always going to assume that we don't know the answers to our own life questions.
even though we don't look like we may have a disability. Yeah.
I know. It's just people are ridiculous in the
Um,
assumptions they make.
yeah. Uh, okay, I want to, this may be a personal question, but it's been a topic that I want to dive into. Um, and I think you're the perfect person to answer this. Why doesn't, why do, why, why does people think with persons with disability can't be in romantic relationships.
Why do people think that? Again,
And
I think it's the same reason people assume we can't have jobs or live independently or go to school or do anything else like average. And we just often do these things in maybe a different way. You know what I mean? But it's just they can't imagine how someone who doesn't walk conventionally or at all, who uses canes or a wheelchair, could possibly do any of the things that you would do in a relationship, right? Even though it's like, in a lot of ways, it's like having friends. Like, do you have friends? Yes. Okay. It's the same. You still go out and you do things and whatever. And in romantic relationships, there's a lot of ways to accommodate everything else, right? But people make assumptions. And then if they do, in my experience, if they do wrap their head around the fact that you are dating or have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, the other thing that they'll do is turn to your partner and go, "Oh, you're such a great person. You're just such a great person for being willing to accept them," and blah, blah, blah. And an ex-boyfriend of mine, we're still good friends. This used to happen a lot. And he would be like, well, you know, like, I'm okay, you know, she likes me, but she's pretty great too, you know. And he would joke and be like, well, you know, I'm probably a bit more challenging to deal with than her disability is, just because of my personality, you know what I mean?
This may get pretty personal, but I'm curious because I follow a person who's in a relationship that is in a wheelchair, and people are always asking him how he does sex stuff. So has that ever happened to you? Because you are pretty well able-bodied, but not so.
And it's like one of the number one questions that people ask. Like, people on the street, like, I will be out and people will have pretty much ever since I was able to be out on my own. I don't know if it happened so much when I was with my parents, but pretty much as soon as I was able to be out on my own with friends, people would stop me in the street and kind of either yell at me or stop me and ask, like, what's wrong with your legs? What kind of, like, why do you walk that way? What kind of disability do you have? But the, like, number two question that you get asked as soon as you're, like, seemingly of appropriate age is, can you have sex? This is the number one question that people want. And when you get to know people, like when I started going to college and stuff like that, this is what people want to know. And my response has always been, well, when I was younger and, you know, hadn't come up yet, and I was like, I assume so. And then as I got older, I was like, yeah, you just make it work, right? You just accommodate it like you do everything else. But it is interesting that this is like one of the number one questions that you get asked.
Because I'm generally not curious, but the couple who I follow on YouTube, they say they get asked that all the time.
All the time.
And why do you think that is?
I think it's because it's one thing that we all have in common, like an interest that a lot of us have in common, in something that our society is generally obsessed with. You know, it's something that most of us think about, something that a lot of us either participate in or wish that we could participate in. And it's just and it's considered to be rather involved, I think. So people assume, like, like when I was in my wheelchair one time, and someone was like, "Did you do it in your wheelchair?" And I go, "Well, I haven't, but I guess you could." You know what I mean? But people also, it's like someone asking you if you sleep in your wheelchair. People don't assume that you can get out of your wheelchair.
Yeah.
I've had friends who have told me that they've been asked if they sleep in their power chair. And their response is like, "Well, I've been known to take a nap once in a while, but like I can get out of it with some help," right? But I think people ask you about sex because it's the one thing that we all sort of think about a lot and have in common, but it's also considered pretty involved. So they're like, "Well, if you have a hard time walking or, taking care of activities of daily life, how could you possibly do that?"
Yeah.
And they're not willing to think outside the box, even slightly.
Yeah.
Because if they sat with it for 2 minutes, they'd probably come up with some ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that couple that I follow on YouTube say because he's in a wheelchair, but he's able-bodied.
Yeah.
So they always say we're gonna leave the internet stuff between us.
Yep.
And just share with you what we think you will find interesting about us. But people still ask them about sex all the time. And that drives me crazy. Or they ask, well, why haven't you left him right now? Because there's no possible way that you could love him.
Right? People are just ignorant. They can't possibly understand anything outside of their own lives. And I've had people, through my experience with dating and the whole online dating thing, right? People, you'd be talking to someone and like on Tinder or Bumble or whatever, you'd be talking to someone for a little while, and then it would come up, that I'm a journalist who focuses on disability. And they'd be like, "Oh, like that's really cool," or like, "So good of you. Like, how did you get into that?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm not like, a saint or anything. I am a person with a disability. So that's why I'm interested in it." You know what I mean? And then they'd be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't realize, like, I wouldn't have, been flirting with you or been talking to you like that if I had known." And I go, "Why?" And they go, "Well, because I want to have like an intimate relationship or whatever." And I'd be like, "Why would you assume I can't?" But people do, right?
Yeah.
They assume right away that you cannot, and that first of all, that that's a deal breaker, and second of all, that there's no possible way that it could work out. That there's no way that you could have that kind of life as well, which is ridiculous. But I think, again, I think people just, I think we don't understand things that are so outside of our wheelhouse, and they don't spend any time considering it. You know what I mean? Or they think, "Oh, it would be too hard in the long run to be with someone," like as an able-bodied person, they think it'd be too hard in the long run to be with someone who's disabled.
You kind of answered my last question on this topic for me. But I'll ask it again. Have you been turned down by relationships because of your disability?
Yes.
Friends or romantic?
Friends, not so much. Usually in terms of friends, if they had an issue with my disability, our friendship just didn't get off the ground.
Yeah.
Same with romantic type relationships, when it got to the whole like Tinder, Bumble, online dating thing, which I've always hated, by the way, but you have to, at some point you feel like you need to try it just because it seems to be the way the world is going.
Yeah.
And
But
and
you would prefer to meet someone naturally?
yes, in person, I feel like it's more human.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is the way that people do things anymore. But I also think that because we have this sort of swipe culture now, it's seen more as a commodity. You don't get to know people the same way. It's just they say something or they don't appear to be exactly what you want, and you just go, oh, okay, never mind, right? Where I feel like if you meet someone in person and they see you, first of all, then I don't have to have an awkward conversation about how I have a disability. I might have to explain it, but I don't have to explain that I walk with a cane. You know what I mean? I feel like it saves time.
Right.
With the whole online dating thing, what was really a struggle about it was having to always have that conversation and like knowing when to have that conversation. So yeah.
So if you're on Tinder or those other dating sites, do you share that you have a disability or not?
I didn't at first, but I do now.
Yeah.
Not that I haven't been on it in a while, but like towards the end of it, of being on there, I definitely did. It cut down on the number of responses I got, but it saved time. You know what I mean? Like, I would rather hear from less people, have to have less of the same conversation about how I have CP and walk with canes,
Yeah.
and occasionally use a wheelchair, than the other way around. You know what I mean? Like, it just is a very tiring conversation to have.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if they're not okay with it, it doesn't go much further than that, which is okay because you don't want to spend time with somebody talking to someone or seeing someone who's not okay with it.
Yeah.
Because it's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? It's not going to change. But I've also had problems in the past where everything was fine with the boy, but his parents were not cool. Right?
And why wasn't the parents fine with it?
They had some very outdated views, and they did not approve of their son being with someone with a disability. No amount of us trying to explain to them the details of my disability or how it affected me or how it affected our relationship was going to convince them that I wasn't going to become a burden and be bedridden in 10 years.
Sorry, Jessica. That just blows my mind because you are probably one of the most normal people I have seen with, well, I don't want to say normal because
No, I understand what you mean.
like you are probably one of the most able-bodied person that I've seen with a disability. So I don't understand why people think your disability gets in the way of you doing
like life.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were pretty convinced that it was going to ruin their son's life, and that I was just wanting, their money and whatever else they had to offer, but that I would essentially hold their son back, and that he couldn't possibly have a normal life with me. And no amount of us trying to tell them was going to help them understand. And, no one wants to come between somebody and their parents. So ultimately we decided not to continue. But now I'm like extra worried about how people's parents are going to react. You know what I mean? Like before that situation, I never really worried about it.
Yeah.
You always worry about what the person that you're dating is going to think, not just what their parents, not what their parents are going to think. Now I'm like, you seem cool, but like, what do you think you're?
Okay.
But it did lead me to some pretty, funny one-liners. Like one time their dad said something about not wanting a bunch of disabled kids running around. And I said, well, sir, they wouldn't be running.
Whoa. That is a pretty low statement.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, first of all, it's not genetic. And second of all, if it was, they wouldn't necessarily be running. I've never ran a day in my life. You know what I mean? So I just tend to meet, stupid ignorance with comedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which usually makes them stop and makes everyone else around laugh.
Yeah.
Because when people are that ignorant, there's nothing you can do. Really.
Okay. Last topic, and we'll breathe for that. But I want to talk about something I heard on the radio today, and that is the state of sidewalks in the city of Toronto.
Okay.
Do you find that the sidewalks are cleared for people with disabilities or not?
Not generally, no. Unless it's in like a major traffic area, like Yonge and Dundas Square or Yonge and Bloor, where the sidewalks are wider and there's more people, so there's probably like the snow gets packed down and that kind of thing. But generally, it's a struggle when there's a lot of snow. I live just east of downtown, close to a subway station, near the Danforth. Very nice area, but because I live, in a more neighborhood with houses and stuff like that on Broadview, it's a smaller sidewalk and there's houses around and people don't tend to do their part when it comes to shoveling their part of the sidewalk. So it's just another thing that makes me really think about whether or not I really need to go outside or what time I need to leave at.
Okay. And as an accessibility advocate, what would your message be to say Mayor John Tory, for example?
A thing that I see regularly, I will call 311 and report it to the city. If it has to do with areas around the TTC, I will tell the TTC. I'm also on their advisory board, so I'll tell the TTC. If it's on, the house that I live in, I'll call my landlord and say, hey, like, would you mind doing some shoveling? If I see my neighbors, I'll mention it to them, politely, but I'm not afraid to bring it up. And I think that is what we can, like, that's more or less what you can do. And then bringing it up in public forums like this, maybe someone will listen and think, oh yeah, it is really important for me to shovel my part of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? it's a terrible situation that we have, that, you know, had we been able to go back however many years, and design our infrastructure differently, or, you know, people can have, you know, install heated driveways now, so
Yeah.
that they don't have the inconvenience of having to shovel.
Yeah.
If it wasn't so expensive, maybe the city would just start putting heated sidewalks in. That would be sweet. Yeah.
That is a great idea. Yeah.
So that the snow doesn't stick.
Yeah, because getting out in the snow for someone with a disability can be a bit stressful at times.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but if people are watching this and you mentioned that you do a lot of accessibility writing, so if someone wants to access that so they can find out more about you, how do they go about that?
Well, you can look at my website, which is jessicagabors.com. So my name.com. I'm also on Instagram at Jessica Gabors, where you can see, you know, some of my adventures that I go on, my trips, and I go to a lot of concerts in my free time. So that's where you see a little bit more about me. I'm also fairly active still on Facebook, because a lot of people with disabilities are on Facebook. So anywhere on social media, and also my website, jessicagabors.com, you can find me.
Okay, last question. What would your message be to someone with a disability who is struggling with their disability?
Who's struggling with their disability? Well, don't give up. You know, keep trying to find that part of life that makes you happy, that gives you the most passion, that, you know, you find your niche, the thing that you're good at, the spot in life where you can make a difference. Like I said earlier, when I was feeling the most frustrated with my disability and society, I decided to, instead of getting mad, to just get involved and try to make a difference that way.
Yeah.
If I couldn't, you know, beat my disability, I was gonna, you know, lean into it and let it be a part of who I am. With my journalism and even with my friends, like, I stopped apologizing, you know what I mean, for being different. I just sort of leaned into it and made it work for my life. So my advice would just be to sort of lean into it and find ways in your life that you can make it work for you.
Great message. Thank you for joining us today, Jessica, and I'm sure we'll have you back.
Thank you for having me. I'd be happy to be back again.
Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me at the show here, my email address is possibilitiesshow@gmail.com, and until next time, keep the gift of disability and have a great day. Bye for now.
Bye.